All right, welcome everybody to Kubernetes SIG Service Catalog on Wednesday, September 27th. The year is 2017. The time is now. Doug is going to execute the agenda today. Go ahead, Doug.
All right. So just to remind everybody, especially for the folks who might be new on the call, if you want to speak, just go ahead and do plus hand or something similar in the chat so you can get on the speakers queue. So let's see, short agenda today. Kent, you are up first to continue the discussion from yesterday.
Yeah, so just for the benefit of anybody who wasn't here yesterday, we started having a discussion or perhaps a rehash of a previous discussion about the naming of a particular resource. That resource is the one that's currently named ServiceInstanceCredential. It's a name that is, it seems, universally loathed and does not make a tremendous amount of sense, and that it may be a misnomer. We had a lot of discussion about it, a lot of bike shedding about it yesterday, and we decided that we were going to put it to a vote once again after having some time to all consider and discuss amongst ourselves. I know some conversations happened offline between various people, and some people may have a new perspective on this, and I don't have too much else to say about it today, unless Ville has anything to say, because it is on the agenda here that he was going to lead a discussion on defining or agreeing on the semantics of what we're naming. But other than that, I don't feel the need to add anything more.
Okay, Ville, you're next in the queue.
Sure. So the previous hand was there because I was hoping to introduce Scott, who has joined the group, but maybe we'll come back to it in just a little bit. But yeah, so I kind of feel like I tried to go ahead and convey yesterday during the meeting that one of the we seem to sometimes focus a little bit on what is happening behind the scenes, which is great mechanically, as in a call is made and so forth. But really what the binding is representing in the original sense of the spec, it is that it is a service binding represents an explicit using or consumption of a service instance from an application. And because we don't have one, we don't really have a notion of an application in Kubernetes. A namespace as a consuming application seems just fine and dandy, semantically speaking.
All right, I'm next in the queue. So yeah, Ville and I talked a bit yesterday about this, and so I guess it just sort of follows on with what he was saying there. He was promoting basically the idea that Service Catalog's job should stop at the time we create the secret. Because at that point, taking a secret and injecting it or doing something else with it is basically back in the realm of normal Kubernetes operations. And so if you look at it from that perspective, then naming this resource that we're talking about service binding, where the binding isn't to an application, it's to a namespace, it's something I can buy into. That seems like a reasonable thing to think of. My only caveat, if we choose to head down this path, is that we get agreement that if later on we choose to create additional resources, that one, they're not called bindings, because I think two things with the same name is going to be confusing, and two, they're viewed as generic Kubernetes resources to manipulate secrets and pods or deployments or whatever. But the point of these utilities is they're not Service Catalog specific. They're there to help you take the output of Service Catalog, meaning a secret, and to do something with them later on for some purpose. The reason I say that is because I think if we're going to buy into the rule that says Service Catalog's job stops at the time the secret is created, then that's fine, but that means any steps after there are generic Kubernetes actions. And we may create some helper utility resources in Service Catalog, but they're not really Service Catalog specific. I wanted to make sure that everybody was sort of on that same page. It's more of a directional statement than it's saying, I'm looking for a particular resource. Anyway, Paul, you're up.
So I don't think that we should prematurely paint ourselves into a corner where we can't make another resource that watches one of these things.
You say these things, can you elaborate? Which are these things?
I think that there is going to be a need for other resources that watch for service catalog resources to become ready that are not part of the service catalog. And I like the naming, we can figure out like whatever naming we need to. But I don't think that we should prevent to say we're never going to make resources in this SIG that even watch the service catalog resources. It seems a little maybe premature to do that.
Okay, thank you. Vile, you're up next, I think.
Yeah, so I was going to go and say, yeah, thanks, Doug, for elaborating a little bit more on sort of what we talked about, and as usual, putting it so eloquently. But yeah, so kind of my gut feeling has been that once the secret has been created, and once it needs to be munched into something else, it is just normal Kubernetes stuff, and it's faced by anybody else, and there is nothing service catalog specific there. And the second point is, I agree with both Doug and Paul in a sense that, yeah, we should not be just willy-nilly creating things that are just different kinds of bindings on one hand, and on the other hand, we should also make sure that we cannot say that we will never ever create something called with the name binding in it either. But I think, Paul, what you're talking about is what I described with Doug yesterday, more of helpers or utilities. That would be something where you basically define some kind of a strategy or policy or something like that, and you say, okay, well, in service catalog, we might have a way to go ahead and make it super easy to go ahead and take these secrets and stuff them into environmental variables under a VCAP name or something like that. But it would be operating on normal Kubernetes things, and it would not be something service catalog specific wherever possible.
Okay, I can next the queue. Yes, so Paul, to your comment, I think I agree with you. I'm not saying we shouldn't ever create new resources, even ones that watch our stuff. In my mind, the way I'm kind of thinking of it, though, is that when you want to create a secret that contains service credentials, there's really going to be only one way to do that, and that's this service binding thing, assuming we go with the name service binding. Obviously, yes, I agree. We should be able to create additional resources later that either watch for secrets that get created or watch for the service binding to say its job is done and then take some further actions. But they're more, as Vile said, they're helping utilities to take the next couple of steps after the secret is created. What I would like to avoid, at least this is my current mindset anyway, what I'd like to avoid is this notion of creating a different flavor of template or a different flavor of binding that has a template, kind of like what we used to have. And I like the separation that we've established right now, and I'd like to sort of make sure that we keep going on down that path that says we have one thing that creates a secret. If you want to do something else with the secret or multiple secrets later, great. But it's a different resource. We're not going to try to head down that path we were before, where we're going to start munging multiple semantics into one resource. Anyway, that's where my current head is at. So Kent, I think you're next.
Yeah, so yesterday, something that was confusing me a lot was I was not completely understanding the concept of a pod preset binding, which is this like future flavor of binding that we've been talking about. That is not part of the machinery that we have today, but it's a hypothetical thing in probably a separate API group, I talked about this extensively with Paul earlier today, and he was very patient in explaining all of this and getting me caught up. And I think the realization that I came to is that, one, all of that stuff is optional. you could use Service Catalog as it exists today without using all of those future pieces that we may build. And that whatever things that we graft onto this for the sake of convenience to take you from, okay, I have a secret, to actually doing something with that secret, other than the manual things that you might do with it today. If we want to graft something like that on, I'm not convinced that the creation or the potential creation of those things has any bearing on how we choose to name things in the core of the SIG, if you will. So, I mean, I don't think, for instance, to make this a little more concrete, I don't think that we're going to be confusing anybody by having something like service binding in the current namespace in the current API group, while having something like pod preset finding in some future hypothetical API group. I don't think that I don't see any inherent confusion based on the fact that they both have binding in the name. I think that people are smart enough to wrap their heads around this stuff. I don't think all these hypotheticals really need to have a bearing on the naming decision that we're facing right now.
Okay, Paul, you're up.
I think we're saying very similar things. So let me make some things explicit as far as my overriding philosophy about all this. So one, I do not think there should ever be another resource that is backed by a controller that does a bind operation. I think that should be the exclusive province of the resource that we're talking about. I also think that we should constrain the Service Catalog API group to be the nucleus, basically, that we have now, modulo any future additions to the API, and that we should draw a very hard line, future additions to Open Service Broker API. And we should draw a very hard line around that and say that that Service Catalog API group is that, and it's only that. And I think my third point is developers going to develop, and probably somebody will come along if the community finds the work that we're doing here compelling, which I think we have good reason to believe they will. We've had a very significant amount of interest in this project already, and I know that we have a lot of different vendors present here that are going to be delivering this to their users at some point. So I think that probably people will develop things around it that we can't foresee. And so reinforcing that the Service Catalog API group is this and only this, and that's all it's ever going to be. If you want to build an integration on top of it, you're welcome to, and you should do it in another API group. Helps us to constrain the problem space and know that we're building the right building blocks, and that's all we're building. And I know that among the different vendors that are present here on the call today, there are probably different integrations that are going to be prioritized differently. And I think that we'll probably wind up with a Venn diagram type thing of just looking at who's present here today. I see we've got people from Google, we've got people from IBM, we've got people from Red Hat, we've got a Zoom client that's incredibly misbehaved and will take over my screen every second when I try to minimize it, which it's currently doing, and why I'm working this ever so subtly into my narrative. But we have a lot of different vendors present. They have overlapping interests. Not everybody's going to be interested in the same types of integrations. And when we get to the point where we're building these utilities, I think to some extent, we need to let the people that are interested in their integrations build them, whether it's in this repository or in another one. But I think the key problem that we're dancing around here, and I'm sorry I've been so long-winded, the Zoom client digression really cost me a lot of words, but whatever. The key that we're dancing around here is that we want to build the right building blocks, and we want to constrain complexity. And I think that we're all talking about the same with regard to those things. Does anybody disagree?
Okay, if you want to make a comment on that, go ahead and raise your hand. Paul, I tried to write those 3 points down. I'm not sure I got it right. Can you just check the notes for me and correct it if it's wrong? In the meantime, Vile, your hand's up.
Yeah, so I was basically going to go and say that I think if there's no disagreements, I think we all good with the notion. We are saying different ways the same thing. Yes, I mean it seems to me like we are basically saying, look, yeah, we're going to slap the secret in the namespace. That's good. We all agree that's what we need to do. We are doing the binding because it semantically makes sense. Let's call it service binding. So, do we need to do anything more?
Okay, well, let me, before we get there, are there any other comments, questions on this before we take the next step, which is probably going to be looking for some kind of vote? So last chance to add some commentary. Okay, so I believe the current proposal in front of us is to rename ServiceInstanceCredential to Service Binding. Does anybody think they need more time to think about this, or are we okay to basically make a decision right now? Because a lot of times for big decisions like this, we let people have a day if they want it. Anybody need more time? Okay, let's take the easy path first. Is there any objection to renaming it Service Binding? Either speak up or raise your hand, one of the two. Going once? Done. There you go. Let me take some notes here. So do we have somebody willing to volunteer to take the action item to do this? Paul, is that you? Okay. Oh, Paul or Vile, you guys can work it out offline, I assume? Between the two of you, if you'll fix it? Cool. Okay, so hold on a minute. All right, excellent. Cool. No one else in the queue. Okay, so next topic. Issue 1200 is add namespace versions of service broker, service class, and service plan. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, let me finish my little spiel. Actually, go ahead, Paul. You go first before I get to my topic.
Okay. So I think whoever, whether it's me, Vile, somebody else, I think that there are a number of very critical and important polls that should be merged first. So what I suggest is that I think there's that Matthew Stabler has a poll for the in progress parameters, and Jeff Peeler has one for orphan mitigation for bindings. Let's go ahead and get those merged first, because that's going to be a rebase that is not fun. And is everybody cool with that? We have a lot of people touching a fairly small code base, and I think we should get the in progress things done before we do a rebate. We rename these resources. Everybody cool with that? And I also think those polls that I referenced are both fairly close to completion. So maybe give it a couple days.
Any comments, objections, or concerns with that? Okay, not hearing any. I figured that's kind of something between you and Vile to work out. Vile, you have your hand up?
Yeah, I just want to make sure that you say that you want to wait a couple of days before doing this, or, I mean, I would like to go ahead and basically propose that we try to cram all of these CLs in today, if possible. I mean, I looked at some of them, made a comment, and I know it was addressed I think it was Jeff addressed it, and it was fine. And I think it's good to merge, so I will do that shortly. And then there was the other one about the orphan medication and something else. But did I misunderstand what you meant by a couple of days, waiting on something for a couple of days?
I just mean that we have some polls that are very close to completion. Let's get those in before we start the rename thing.
Yes, agreed. Yeah.
Yeah, that's all.
Yep.
All right, cool. Any other comments, questions? All right, moving on. So as I was saying, there's an issue out there, 1200, which talks about creating a namespace version of Service Broker, Service Class, and Service Plan, because there are use cases where people would like those three types of resources to be scoped to a namespace and not global. And I'm not suggesting we do that now for beta or anything like that, but rather when we do think about doing that in the future, one of the things that I think Paul had suggested was we may do something as simple as prefix those resources with the word local so that people understand there's service broker and then there's local service broker, where local service broker means the one that's scoped to a namespace, which something like that seems perfectly reasonable. So if we do that though, there's a problem. Our current service instance doesn't have the prefix local on it, yet it is scoped to a namespace. And I know at least IBM has a use case where we want a global service instance that isn't tied to a particular namespace. So what I'd like people to think about, I'm not going to push for a vote now because I think people need to think about it, is I'd like people to think about whether we should prefix or rename service instance to local service instance. That way we don't have to worry about renaming something post-beta, because renaming post-beta could mean bumping to another version, which is not going to be good. But I want to put that idea out there, get people to think about it, because that is a use case that IBM at least needs to support in the future, and I want to make sure we get the naming right to handle that. So Paul, you're up.
Yeah, so I think that we should not name the namespace version as local. The reason is because in most of the Kubernetes clusters in existence, ordinary users do not have permission to create, most of the Kubernetes clusters that enable RBAC, ordinary users typically do not have access to work with global objects. And so I think that the default for an end user is going to be like, my service instances are in my namespace. I'm also not immediately sure that I think that global service instances are the right way to accomplish a service instance that's globally usable. And so I am very curious in knowing like particulars about the use case, which maybe we can discuss later. But I think as far as like what most users interact with, service instance is going to be the best name for them. Just my 2 cents, having heard about this for, I guess, maybe 10 minutes since I saw it on the agenda.
Yeah, so I'll work on trying to get a write-up on some of the use cases. The one, unfortunately, my memory is not what it should be, and the one that really stands out in my mind that I've heard from our guys is something along the lines of they need to create like a DevOps type of service, and that's not necessarily tied to a namespace. It's more global within the cluster. But I'll try to get more details to talk about that. But what I really raised my hand for is sort of the flip side of it. I think you yourself have even mentioned that you might have use cases where service brokers may be namespace specific, or service classes, or some of the other resources, right? So I'm kind of curious, thinking about it from the Kube way of doing things. How would you recommend we differentiate between like global service broker versus namespace service broker? What would be the right Kube way to do that differentiation?
So that's a tricky problem because we do not have resources that have different global and namespace flavors. I think that differentiating them between them, do you mean names or do you mean as far as how we reference them? for example, service instances?
No, I'm not worried about referencing. At this point, I'm actually just more interested in just naming of these resources.
So that's a good question. I think if anything, if we were to consider, yeah, I can't think of any precedent that we have for this.
I think this might be something we should take up with SIG architecture first chance we get.
I think the first SIG architecture meeting is Thursday of next week, right?
That might be kind of far out. I could
Actually, wait. I think it's tomorrow. Let me look.
Is it tomorrow? Okay. Oh, yeah. Thank you, Matt. Matt says it's tomorrow. Let me check my calendar too.
All right. Why don't we talk in SIG architecture about it?
Okay, that's a good idea. So hold on. I'll take some notes here. Oh. Okay, that's a good way to start. Any other comments, questions about that?
So one thing that I'll bring up, and this is not about the naming, but about a service instance that's globally usable. One thing that we have also talked about, which is tangentially related to this, is cross namespace consumption of service instances, like a binding to a service instance in another namespace. And I think that is something that we will eventually need. And if I'm not mistaken, I think the use case that you described, and I know you need to get more information about it, could be handled if the namespace that this particular instance was in was configured to with a policy that allowed any other namespace to use it.
Interesting. Okay. Vile, your hand's up.
I was going to also say that do we ever envision there being a need to go cross clusters, by being able to go and consume services between clusters? I don't want to go and open this up for too long there, but it's just there's the cross namespace. What's the next one, and cross clouds and whatnot.
Okay. Any comments, question? Paul, you're up.
As a person responsible for Kubernetes multi-cluster at Red Hat, I can tell you that I think that that is a problem for 2020.
Hold on a minute. Just trying to take some notes here at the same time. All right. Hold on. Just taking some notes. Okay. Any other comments, questions, concerns? I think we have at least a sort of a path forward here. Talk to SIG Arc first.
Thanks, everybody, for your continued focus on ODOT 1.0 issues. We're getting a chunk of things out of the way. I actually wonder, we have about 29 minutes left. How do people feel about taking a look at what's in ODOT 1.0 and seeing where we are?
Kent, you're up.
Hey, yeah, before we do that, Paul, I did add something to the agenda.
Oh, I missed that. Hold on. Okay, so hold on. Let's pull that out to the top level thing.
Oh, that's why it got missed. Sorry about that.
Yeah, not a problem. Go ahead, Kent.
Oh, yeah. So just what it says, I have a request from Aaron that I just ask what the current status or timeline is for a beta release.
I think that we're going to be able to more fully answer that question once we take a look at the remaining issues.
So we have 29 minutes or 28 minutes. Why don't we go ahead and take a look at the issues that Paul suggested, then before we adjourn, we can circle back and try to answer Kent's question. How's that?
And I think you've got to take off. I can drop you a line in Slack after this.
Yeah, I do have a hard stop. If you can do that, that would be fantastic, Paul.
Okay.
All right. Thanks a lot.
Okay.
See you.
So hold on a sec. All right, Paul, how do you want to do this? You want Morgan to share the screen, or you want to share?
Morgan can share the screen. He must share the screen and show this milestone because I think this behavior of Zoom must be initiated by the client that is sharing the screen, because Morgan's client in particular is especially grabby about my screen. And I don't think that that is something that has to do with Morgan's personality. I think it's the version of the client that's installed on his computer. Okay, so support parameter updates is first. I believe Matthew Stabler has some code for that he's started working on. Matthew, do you want to say a few words about that?
Yeah, I've started working on that. It's pretty far along. I mean, I think the bulk of like the logic stuff is done. I'm in the process of doing some rebasing and some preparation for orphan mitigation PRs that are pending and getting that in line with the work that I've done. But that's pretty close to being ready to be reviewed.
Okay, and I think that also goes for the 10th issue in the list here, which is support plan updates. They're one and the same, right?
Yeah, those are together in the same code changes.
Okay. So those are in progress. If we could just head back over, yeah, there we go. So the next one is to make the API server serve open API. I know that Menke at Google has been working on this. He works with Sunil and Phil Whitrock, and I think that there's an open question about so like the issue that we need to resolve about this, and I'm leaning towards moving this out of 0.1.0 and maybe into 0.1.1, is that currently you have to serve the open API for the core API as well, which is kind of problematic for us. It basically doubles the memory consumption in the API server. And so I wonder if people would be comfortable moving this out to an 0.1.1, because I don't think that we need to gate 0.1.0 on it. And I also know that, like, since we're basically releasing a microservice that's installed in Kubernetes, that I think that users will be able to iterate pretty rapidly once we have new releases. So I don't know that this should block 0.1.0. How do people feel about moving this one to 0.1.1?
I'm sorry, Paul, which one are you referring to?
This is 1208, make API server serve open API.
Oh, okay.
So with that, Sam Paget, I think you're on the line. Is there anything that we lose by not doing this from a UI perspective that you're aware of?
Sam, you on mute?
Okay, well, I can think of one thing. So the reason that this is in the long term important to us is that there is a experimental feature in kubectl that lets the open API served by an open API or served by an API server tell kubectl what columns it should display. So this is probably important. Well, this is important for us to have in the long term for user experience. I think we should consider moving this out to 0.1.1 anyway. But I'm perfectly happy for folks to think about it, and maybe we can talk about it tomorrow or talk about it on Monday. Okay, I'm not hearing any other comments. So next one is 1239, publish a single image with API server and controller manager. I started working on a naive approach to this. It was a little more annoying than I expected because our makefile stuff assumes that there's only going to be a single image. So I am hoping that maybe if I have a spare hour or two, I can make a single binary that has the both sets of code in it that does the classic Unix binary trick of if you call me API server, I'm an API server. If you call me controller manager, I'm a controller manager. Or we can have subcommands, whatever. I'd like to get this one done. I don't have a incredibly strong opinion about it, but it would be very convenient for us at Red Hat if we did this. And I think it's better for users too. I know at least one person in the last week has come to me with an issue that wound up being they were running an API server that was out of date relative to the controller manager. So it's something to think about. Any reactions on that one? Okay. Next one is RBAC resources and Helm chart will need to be updated for Kubernetes 1.8. That's actually not strictly true. Kubernetes 1.8 supports the V1 Beta 1 API version of RBAC. I think we could get away without that. But it's also a fairly easy change. If somebody's interested in making a contribution, I can talk to you about how to do that one. Any takers? All right, and 1200 there, add a namespace version of service broker, service class, and service plan. I think that was in scope, so we would discuss it. I think we should move that to 0.2.0.
I'm okay with moving it once we have, at least once we finish the current discussion that we just started today.
All right. Next one is 1181. This is just mechanical stuff. Create a V1 Beta 1 API version after the beta API is finalized. Obviously, we need to do this.
Hold on a sec. Scott, are you trying to say something? You said me, question mark? Were you volunteering for something?
Is that RBAC? Scott?
1236. Yeah, RBAC.
Okay. All right. Why don't you ping me after this in Slack, Scott, and I can help walk you through what you need to do on that one. Yep, Scott, it's yours. All right, next one. Enabling request header CA to be passed to the API server. I think this was open 29 days ago by Aaron. I think Aaron's out for 2 weeks. Does anybody know if this is actually something that makes a difference to people anymore? Can anybody attest to that?
Which one are you on again? Enabling request header?
1173, yeah.
Oh.
Is this this looks like a thing for the Helm chart. Okay, I think this is related to a Minikube thing. Let's call it that it's in, but I'm going to send Aaron an email about this. See if it's still an issue. Next one, 1172 API server crashes when installed on Minikube. I had questions about whether this is still an issue. Does anybody present on the call today use Minikube?
I do.
Has the API server been crashing for you when installed on Minikube?
I can't say for sure as of late.
Do you use Minikube for development?
No, I use it sometimes for doing some prototyping nonsense.
I gotcha. Okay. So I think somebody needs to determine if this is still an issue.
Can we just, yeah, it's, what's its status with Aaron? Is he coming back next week?
I think he's out next week too.
Okay, I'm just thinking that the API changes and things like that are higher priority, but I could probably tackle it next week. But I would rather.
Yeah, I mean, I think that somebody needs to attest to whether this is actually an issue. If we don't hear anything, we should just close this. So next up, add a reconciled instance state. We've got a pull request that's open for this one. I think that this is probably going to be merged imminently. So that one we'll call near completion. Publish Helm charts to a Helm repo. Aaron said there is no way he can finish this before we release a beta. So I suggest that either somebody else takes it or that we move it to 0.2.0.
I might be able to talk to somebody from Google side to see if they might be willing to take this on. Somebody like Vic, maybe, who's familiar with both Helm and the repos. So,
Okay.
And sorry, which one was that again? Publish Helm chars 735.
Where did that go? Yeah, 735.
Yeah, let's go.
If someone's going to do this, I think it really needs to get done in like the next week, or it needs to slip.
Yep.
And this one, scope of initial beta release, 1098. Can we close that with no action? I mean, we know what that one's going to be.
Yeah, that was more like a placeholder for discussion anyway, right?
All right. Feel free to go ahead and close that one, Morgan, while you're in there. Okay. So next up, document our secret update policy. This is a doc thing.
I will promise to do that over the next day or so.
All right, perfect. I like what I hear. Orphan mitigation for bindings and instances is in progress. Scalability of retrieving service classes is done. Someone needs to go and close that.
Well, wait a minute, Morgan, did you finish everything related to that? I thought there might have been follow-on tasks.
That's old hat now.
Morgan, can you talk to that one?
I mean, I think Vile was doing the field selector part.
Is that the
That
last?
was a separate piece. So
Was that the last little bit? Was that the last little bit that needed to get done, or were there other bits?
that's all I know of.
Okay, so the one thing, while I was looking at the admission controller for the things, there was a couple of times when we've been through all the like service classes and basically grep through the name. So I think there's some places where we can be smarter about things. And now that the label and field selectors are in there, we should be able to utilize those. But yeah.
Okay, I think this one is done unless somebody can tell me what's not done about it. GitHub issues are cheap too. If we find something else that needs to be done, we can make a new issue for it.
Okay, I have to take off a little early today because I have a conflict. So I will. Sorry.
Okay. Next up, validate that external ID fields do not change. I think this is done for us now by virtue of our naming thing, or Vile's naming poll, which I believe will be merging imminently if it has not already been done.
Yeah, I think we checked this in a couple places. So
Yeah. I tell you what, as an action item, I will go and link this to Vile's poll. And I think that leaves us with like one other thing, which is broker update semantics. I think that we've also pretty much designed our way out of this one too, with the caveat that there is some work to do about if you have a service plan or a service class that is removed, that there are still active instances of, we need to keep it around and mark it terminated.
Do we have an issue for that one or PR for that one yet?
You know, I've been thinking about that one today. I will make an issue after this. And I think we can probably close out the update semantics thing. But I'll handle that later on when I'm doing this stuff. And I actually think that one's pretty easy. So I might just code that one up tonight because I'm a really cool guy. We'll see. Okay. So I think it sounds like we have a couple things that represent open questions. We have almost everything else in progress, and we have some very small, minor things left to do afterward. By the way, in case anybody missed this in the chat, we would probably have an issue that said make sure Kubernetes namespace termination correctly handles all this stuff, but I tested that and it works. Yay! So in terms of, excuse me, what the question Kent asked, what kind of timeline are we looking at? I would say that 1 week from today, I think that it seems like we should be able to be feature complete by then and probably bump the API. I think that it would be prudent to have another a week after that is like code freeze and people can test and use the new API version before we cut the initial beta release. How does that sound to folks?
That's a good goal.
I'm hearing Doug's on board.
Stunned silence.
All right, yeah, exactly. Okay, well, maybe that's something we can talk through on Monday, since that is our typical time to assemble everybody, although I think we basically assemble everybody all the time. New release tonight. Doug, I think I had wanted to wait on that until maybe tomorrow. Because I think that there are like a bunch of polls that we will probably merge before then. Does anybody object to waiting until tomorrow and I can do the release tomorrow afternoon?
Any objection? Done.
All right. Sounds like we're done. 9 minutes ahead of time.
All right, so we're still going to meet tomorrow, usual time.
Yeah.
All right. Any last minute topics you want to bring up? All right. We are concluded then.
All right. See you, everybody.
Talk to you tomorrow.